Hi, welcome to the Open Case channel. Today we bring you a new case for you. I hope you enjoy it. We hope you are all well from wherever in the world you are tuned to this channel, so let's go. An inflamed community rose up to take justice into their own hands, since an unacceptable event had just occurred in that population. The 23-year-old twins Dulce and Rosa Rodriguez Olvera were accused by the residents of having ended their sister-in-law and son, because in their own words, she was a witch who wanted to end her family. His own brother could not believe what they had just done. Both were arrested after the report they made to the authorities. Among the uproar of the population, they were put on the patrol car to make their statement. Regarding the facts, this event occurred after the mother of both twins suffered from cirrhosis. They took her to doctors, but unable to cure her, she decided to take her to a healer, who told them that they were careful with their sister-in-law, because she was doing witchcraft to them, to end their family and thus be able to keep their properties. With the passage of time, their mother worsened and died due to her illness. Prior to this, the healer had announced that they were careful with Beatriz, her sister-in-law, since she practiced witchcraft against her, so after the death of her mother, they were convinced that she had told them the truth. The constant friction with her sister-in-law gradually escalated, to the point that her father kicked her out of her house, after an argument, for which they had to move to their new house, within the same neighborhood when they did not show pain and their demeanor was cold. They did not look fearful or remorseful. Once they arrived at the prosecutor's office, the interrogation began. They asked their names and what they were accused of. They were separated to give their statement. The first to be questioned was Rosa, so she began to narrate the incident, mentioning that her brother, who lives in Pachuca, told her over the phone that Beatriz had haunted her father, that is why he had kicked them out of the house. And that he had thought of leaving everything to Beatriz when he died, because in the face of an argument his father had thrown them out and his brother and his wife Beatriz stayed to live in their father's house, while the sisters had to move. At first, she did not want to kill her, she assured, because Dulce, her sister, told her that witches did not exist and that they were just inventions that people had created. Then, it was when they saw the devil. The policeman interrupted her and asked her if they had both seen him. She affirmed that yes, she was completely convinced that she had seen him. She went on to say that one night before the murder, she and Dulce were walking down the street, as they passed the corner, in front of her father's house. Her sister saw a shadow on the wall. Dulce stopped and trembled with fear, although it was also cold, but she affirmed saying, "I saw what she saw, it was the shadow of the devil, in my father's house." So her sister told Rosa, "You're right, you were telling the truth, Betty is a witch." Dad was going to go to Pachuca to pick up a truck. They would take advantage of that time to kill her. That night she mentioned that she couldn't sleep, because they thought about what Beatriz would do to them if she tried to kill her. If she was a witch, her powers would paralyze them, or even worse, they would turn them in chickens, to later eat them. That seemed like a tremendous joke, but she was serious. That day, Dulce watched over the house, waiting for her father to leave, then she would notify her sister, when it was time, while she was preparing everything necessary to act. In a pillowcase, she put a rope, a Christ, a rosary, holy water from the temple and a prayer book. When her dad left, Dulce entered the room. She was sweating and trembling. Rosa asked her if she was afraid. She said yes, very afraid, since Betty was a witch and that she would probably do something bad to them. When they entered the house he felt very cold, as if they were about to die. He still had the key to enter his father's house, so they did not raise any suspicions. He mentioned that when he opened there was no one on the ground floor, so they went up, step by step, to the second floor. The corridor on the second floor was empty. The silence was total. Suddenly, the baby's crying told her where the supposed witch was. They both ran screaming towards her. Dulce pushed Betty, both of them falling to the ground. They struggled, pulling their hair, biting and scratching each other. Then Rosa began throwing holy water at them. While she was praying in Our Father, Dulce got on top of her as best she could. Then she with the Christ, hit her on the head, until she began to lose strength. Then Dulce took her by the neck. The force she exerted was so great that her tongue came out of the mouth, as if it were a verified snake. When it no longer moved, he realized that it had been killed. It was at that moment that they went for his father's tools. In order to cut off the limbs, they tried a hacksaw, but it snapped, so they raised the body to lower it. But the child began to cry very loudly, and in desperation, before someone was going to find out, Dulce went up and threw him against the wall. They both went down to the patio. There it occurred to them to burn them, so that the spell against her dad would end. Then they kept the bodies in the closet, where they prepared the stove to be able to destroy them. Then they lowered them into a sack and took them to their house. There with an axe and scissors, they cut off the limbs and put them in the stove. This was Rosa's first statement. While her sister was in the other interrogation room, to give her version of the facts. There, she was put under torture by the police. They chained her against the wall and subjected her to a brutal punishment, but she only said, "Betty was a witch, that's why we ended her." After that, the victim's sentimental partner appeared to testify at about 12 o'clock at night. Relatives and several, in order to demand justice, the inhabitants of the nearby areas were detained in the Social Rehabilitation Center until the investigation was clarified, and only a few months later, in their second statement, they recounted something completely different, stating that they had acted in defense personal, because Beatriz, her sister-in-law, was the one who attacked them. Then they mentioned that at about 11 o'clock in the morning, on June 30, 2008, they were at home, when Beatriz, 16, arrived, carrying her 3-month-old baby. Rosa was making the bed, with her back to the door. She heard someone come in, but she didn't care. Then she realized it was her sister-in-law, who out of nowhere began to offend her, told her that she was fed up and was going to die. She laid the baby down on the bed and continued insulting her. Beatriz had a bandage on her hands. Then she pounced on him. Given the situation, Rosa reacted and threw her to the floor, took her by the head to whip her at the base of the bed, which was of partitions, but since her sister-in-law had a more robust complexion, she could not cope with her, because she mentioned that Beatriz had more strength. Between the struggle, she insulted her. At that moment, Sweet entered, who had gone for firewood, and seeing that she was in danger she helped her sister. Between the two of them they gave her a tremendous beating, and with the same bandage she was wearing, they ended up choking her. At that moment the baby began to cry, and since they were both so euphoric, Rosa told her sister that they should also kill the baby. It was then that he got up and covered his mouth and nose with his hands, until he stopped moving, just a few hours later, they went to his father's farm, named Trinidad Rodriguez, 60. Once finishing their chores, they returned to the house by themselves, since he usually returned until nightfall. Once in the house, they began to think about what they would do with the bodies, and they came up with the idea of putting half of it in the stove together with the little one and the remaining part cut up in a sack. They used an axe and scissors to cut the chicken. The entrance to the stove was very narrow, so between the two of them they forced the remains. They thought that this way they would erase all evidence, and with the ashes of the bodies they heated the food of the day. Everyone was looking for the mother and son, since the woman had agreed to go help wash the dishes for one of her sisters, but she never came and they didn't know anything about them. Beatriz's relatives were worried about her disappearance, so they decided to go to the Olvera home, to see if they knew anything. It was then that Celso Rodriguez Olvera went with his sisters to see if they had any information on Beatriz, and at that exact moment, he saw them manipulating the extremities of the bodies while they were putting them in the stove. He also noticed that in a sack there were parts of the body, from the waist down. Surprised, he asked them why they had done it. They replied that his sister-in-law had haunted the family and that is why they had ended her, for fear of being involved. He left immediately from there. When he returned, they saw him nervous and scared. After that, Juventino Sanchez Lopez, Beatriz's brother, noticed the terrifying scene, so he immediately reported the discovery to the authorities, around 8 p.m. At night, that same day, he looked for the Olvera sisters, but they had disappeared. The culprits had already fled and were hiding on a hill. Juventino began looking for them all around, and minutes later he found them. He then began to severely assault them and asked the neighbors for help to lynch them, because he told them what they had done with his sister. The news was quickly spread throughout the community. They were taken by Juventino back to their home, and minutes later, neighbors arrived who, enraged, wanted to lynch the young women, cataloging the fact as a satanic act, affirming that they were witches. The community wanted to remove them by force. She justified themselves by saying that the witch was her sister-in-law and that they had to kill her in order to remove the curse from her father. Even so, they were beaten and dragged by the neighbors, who were furious at the event. The sisters began to scream and cry. At that precise moment, around 9 p.m. At night, 1 hour after the report was reported, the police arrived, cleared the place and put her in the patrol car, preventing them from being lynched. They were taken, first to Tulancingo and then to the central offices of the Attorney General's office. In Pachuca it was possible to confirm that at the time of their arrest, both Rosa and Dulce were in their 5 senses when committing the crime. They were neither under the consumption of alcohol nor under the consumption of drugs. Rosa insisted that she killed Beatriz because she was doing witchcraft to her. To corroborate that, she showed her shoulder with traces of dry skin, saying that there was the harm that her sister-in-law had done to her. Her sister Dulce added that even he cleaned it with eggs, but even so, the stains did not disappear. He affirmed that days before, he had visited a healer who told him that Beatriz was doing witchcraft to his entire family and that when they all died he would keep the houses and the land that belonged to them, and he was the one who suggested that to put an end to it, they had to get rid of his sister-in-law, deciding then to also end the life of his nephew. According to the versions settled before the agent of the public ministry, everything pointed to that the twins planned the murder a week in advance, that they were committed at the suggestion of a witch, who stated that her 16-year-old sister-in-law Beatriz Sanchez Lopez and her 3-month-old baby wanted to bewitch them, to stay with the property of his father-in-law. It was mentioned that he was deceitful. They took the woman and her son to their home, where they were already waiting for her to deprive him of his life. When they found the whereabouts of the healer, they summoned him to testify to establish responsibilities, and there in a confrontation with Rosa, he mentioned that he did not know them and that he never told her that Beatriz was a witch. The belief in witchcraft was undoubtedly the trigger for both of them to plan the crime. They took their beliefs to a crucial point in their history, ending in a tragic ending. They were sentenced to 80 years in prison and were detained in the Tulancingo Social Readaptation Center. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't hesitate to give us a thumbs up, to comment and share. I invite you to subscribe to this channel if you are not already and activate the notification bell to receive the latest uploads. See you next time.